Well, hello, everybody. Roger Derling, Executive Director at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And we're here with the incredible Academy Award nominated filmmaker, Steve James, who, I mean, he's done iconic documentaries like Hoop Dreams, and now he has the five-part series, Cities So Real. I really quickly, I want to read a quote from Richard Roper from the Chicago Sun-Times about the series. It's an in-depth, epic documentary that captures big stories and small ones in a splintered Chicago with campaign, protest, and a pandemic in the foreground. The five-part series also listens in on people feeling the effects of change. Welcome, Steve. It's quite an honor. Right before we came live, I was mentioning that the first year I took over for the film festival, I got, you were a guest of ours here, and it's a great honor to have you once again.
Great to be
Um,
back.
yeah, although in different
And
circumstances.
yeah, yeah, it's a beautiful town you got there. It'd be nice to be there.
I agree. I actually want to start right away. I lived in France for a year in 1982, and I've always been a big fan of documentaries and film. And I got to see La Jolie May, the lovely month of May, the documentary from 1963 by Chris Marker, and of course there is an influence from that documentary on your piece. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I saw that film back in graduate school, back in like, oh God, 1979 or 80, somewhere in there. Um, and I just loved it. I'd never seen anything like it. I was very early on in my love of film, and certainly, especially documentary film. Um, and I just was really struck by how Marker was able to kind of create this indelible portrait of Paris, but it was kind of I call a kind of a kitchen sink approach to storytelling. It's like there are verite scenes in it. There are scenes where he talks to people on the street. There are scenes where he's just sort of looking over his shoulder while he's having a conversation in a cafe. There are poetic passages. He even has poetic
Yeah.
voiceover in it. I knew better than to try that. Um, I'm not Chris Marker, but you know, there are these beautiful Cartier-Bresson type montages. I mean, and I just remember when I first saw it thinking, in a documentary, you can do anything. I think that was the film that really impressed upon me that anything can be done in a documentary. And it just lodged in the back of my mind. And as I ended up moving to Chicago after school and getting involved in film and making Hoop Dreams, and after I'd been here for a number of years, I kept thinking about that film and thinking, God, it would be cool to try to attempt to do something like what he did with Chicago. But you had to find the right time to do it, because in that film, he picks a very key moment when France is coming out of the war with Algeria,
Algeria.
and it's very much in the air and very much on people's minds. And so when this mayoral election rolled around in 2018, it promised to be one of the most no holds barred, wide open ones in history of Chicago. And I thought, this is the moment to do that, because Chicago does find itself at this incredible crossroads. And so, inspired by him, we just kind of went out and kind of did the kind of thing he did. Ours has more narrative because of the election, I think, than his film, but we really did take this sort of serendipitous approach of following stories where they took us, meeting people on the streets and just embracing them, instead of what you usually do in a lot of docs is people see you out with a camera and you're doing something and they're always coming up to you and saying, hey, and you're usually trying to gracefully get them away. This was one where like, hi, how are you? And we ended up talking and meeting people, and they ended up in the film that way.
Now, you were shooting already for 2 months when the Emmanuel um, a bombshell that he wasn't going to run for election took place. You couldn't have never predicted this, and how did that shift your, your approach to the subject matter?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not so much I think that it shifted our approach. It just shifted the landscape of what was going to happen. So, for instance, in those 2 months before he dropped out, we were, very much pursuing him through his media representatives. And I had met David Axelrod, when I did something, and I was like trying to get David Axelrod to talk to Ram on behalf of me. And of course, Axelrod at that time, this is before Ram dropped out, Axelrod said to me, well, that's if he runs. And I was like, what do you mean if he runs? Of course he's running. He's raised $10 million. Of course he's running. He went, I don't know. I think Axelrod did know. So, we really wanted to get the mayor as part of this film, running for re-election and seeing him on the job as mayor. And we're having trouble getting through. And then when he dropped out, then there was no point in that. But what it did do is it opened the floodgates for some of these higher profile candidates to suddenly throw their hat in the ring. And it made what I thought going in was going to be a film as it related to the mayor's race about the attempt to unseat Rahm Emanuel. And there were a number of people running who had serious grudges with him. It turned into a very different kind of election film. It turned into a film where it became this free-for-all with, at one time, 21 candidates and eventually 14 on the ballot.
When we watch a documentary, it's incredible to see your ability to track fast developing events. I mean, can you address that? I mean, was that something that was incredibly difficult, or you after a while got nimble at the idea of doing that?
It was a challenge, especially at first. We got better at it. There were most days that we went out that we knew we were filming one thing, but had no idea what we were going to film after that. And at first, that was really unsettling because even though I'm a filmmaker, who enjoys sort of letting the story lead me and really try to embrace the uncertainty of what you're filming, because that's part of the whole, journey of making a documentary. It was really kind of unsettling to not have any kind of real plan at all. And we would go out, we would shoot something. My partner on the film, Zach Piper, would follow social media. He would follow the daily press book that the local media has. And he would see something happening. He'd say, hey, oh, this is happening. Should we go there? And we'd be like, sure, let's go. And so it was very serendipitous. And that was also extended to people that we met that weren't even about the sort of newsworthy items of the day. For instance, the shoe shine guy that has a little scene, Maine is his name. We would see him at the Board of Elections and he was always friendly, and he sort of sought us out at one point. We decided, let's just spend a day with Maine, and sort of see what goes on with his life. The same with the Uber driver, Tracy. She was giving us a ride back to our cars from a shoot because we tended to Uber around or use Lyft to get around instead of having to go back and get our cars all the time. And she just started talking about how much she loved Amara Enya. And I just said, hey, do you mind if I sit in the front seat and talk to you about this? And that's what transpired as a result. So once we got into the rhythm of that, there was something quite actually liberating about it. In a weird sort of way, I almost don't want to go back to more usual modes of filming. I love this idea of just sort of going out there. Mm-hmm. And we did become much more nimble, and we about getting from place to place and making decisions on the fly.
Yeah, I mean, when we watch the documentary, you're like, you seem to be everywhere. There was one approach that you did that I was really riveted at, like, for example, when you go to the Daly's restaurant, instead of focusing on the candidate that is on, hosting people, you focus on the waitress, and you focus on the campaign manager. I mean, not campaign manager, but the campaign
Yeah.
volunteer outside. I mean, in another documentary, we would be focused on the campaign. I mean,
The
the
candidate
the
himself, right?
candidate himself. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you asked about that for a couple of reasons. One is that was with Paul Vallis, the candidate, and
Yes, Paul Bells.
Paul had he expressed to us that he had discomfort, and this is part of the reason why, this is just this is a little bit of a joke, but this is maybe one of the reasons why he didn't win the election, because he had some very retro ideas about media. He had told us that he was uncomfortable when we would go, if we would be out with him and filming, that he did not want people that he was meeting to think he had his own camera crew. And of course, I'm thinking, dude, that's a good thing. But he was like, no, I don't want them to think I have putting on airs and have a camera crew. And I'm like, you don't have to. You just say we're doing a documentary. That's a good thing. But anyway, we could never get through to him on that. But when he went to Daly's, we had been in Daly's a couple of times to eat because we'd been down there to film. And we had said, God, we want to film in this restaurant. And then when we heard he was going to go there, we thought, perfect. We'll use that as our reason to go to Daly's. But we knew, A, he wouldn't want us there, and B, it would be boring to sit over there with him and hear him prattle on about, his ideas, because I'd seen enough of that already. And so we went with his campaign advisor guy, who was his setup man at the restaurant, and we put a mic on the waitress. And one of the reasons I love that scene so much, there's a couple of reasons I love that scene so much. First of all, it's one of my favorite scenes, but it's also a scene that my son Jackson, who worked very closely with me, he shot a good part of that scene. I wasn't even there for it, and then I showed up. And he was nice enough to let me film for a while because he could see how much I wanted to film. So he let me have the camera. And then we discovered this incredible woman, who sings for us. And it turns out she's a homeless woman. And she's just got this incredible view of life. And all of those things, the surprises of that scene from start to finish, are like why I love documentary.
Mm-hmm. Which leads me to the barbershop. There you contrast the barbershops. How much coverage did you have to have, like in the African American barbershop, where they're having that heated argument, and we actually get close-ups of them, and then we have walk us through that.
How that happens. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I get asked this question a lot, like how many cameras did I have on a shoot? And inevitably the answer 99.9% of the time is one camera, because I've never been, well, for budget reasons, but also for imprint in the moment, I like to be as small as possible. So in the first barbershop scene, in the black barbershop, that I was there for that, but Kevin Shaw, who has worked with me most closely on America to Me, the series, was the shooter there, and he did a terrific job of just capturing the scene. And he's so good that I don't need to say much of anything to him I just need to stay out of his way, because he knows what he's doing, and he gets a good camera person who shoots verite knows to mix it up and think like an editor, think about what you're going to need in order to make something work. And he's great at that, and did a fantastic job. In the white barbershop, I shot that. Kevin's African-American. If he had shot that scene would not have happened the way it happened. That scene happened because the two people shooting that scene were me and Zach Piper, who are both white. And again, it's one camera and it's the same deal. It's just the tricky thing with barbershops, because I've shot in a few barbershops over the years. The tricky thing with barbershops is all the mirrors.
Yeah.
You're constantly having to deal with mirrors and seeing yourself in the mirror. And if you don't want to see yourself in the mirror, your sound person has to be very savvy to constantly be staying out of your shot as well while they try to get good sound. But, you know, in both those cases, they're one camera setups, but, you know, with Kevin and myself, we've shot enough now that, you know, we kind of, you know, I guess we know what we're doing.
And how did you, I mean, both parties, actually everybody that you cover seems so relaxed and at ease and unaware. I mean, not as self-conscious with the camera. How did you achieve that for people to trust you?
Right. Yeah. You know, I think in different situations, different things seem to be at work. I think in the Black Barbershop, we had a majority Black crew there. I was there, but the sound person was Black. Kevin's Black. We had a field producer there who was Black. And I think there was a comfort level for them in seeing the makeup of our team that allowed them to feel, you know, if I had been shooting, I think it still would have been a good scene, I hope. But there would be possibly an element of them feeling like they are speaking to me instead of to each other. And I think that the makeup of the team helps that. And then our whole approach, whether it's me shooting or someone else in my team, our whole approach is to be very, very low key and friendly and not make a big deal of what we're doing, to kind of communicate in every sense of how we do this, that this is no big deal, that this is just we're just doing this thing, you know, and there's nothing to get excited about, you know, just we're just here, we're just doing it. And I found over the years that when people have things that they're really engaged in their own conversations, then if you've created a level of comfort, then they are willing to let you be there and kind of, it's not so much they ignore you or forget about you, but they just, their focus is on each other because that's where their interest lies. And so it becomes more natural. My son shot a scene that's in episode 4 in the home of these Gary McCarthy supporters, who was a white candidate, you know, where this one guy in particular, but several people are saying some rather racist things.
Exactly, over dinner. Yeah.
And my son, he shot that scene. I wasn't there for that. And he's also one of these guys who's very good at just sort of being in the space, being friendly, not committing, not giving you a sense of how he's feeling about what you're saying, just kind of going with it. And I think that's the key. When people say things, unless you're in a position, and I've done that before, where you want to confront someone, and I've done that before, then a lot of what you're doing in those situations is you're not trying to encourage and you don't, I never like say, yeah, I agree. You know, I never lie to people about where I am. I just keep myself out of it and try to let them feel comfortable to express who they are.
Which actually leads to my next question, Steve, is that you never, use narration. Was that difficult to find a way to, do the storytelling, but just by letting the scenes, do the talking for themselves?
Right. Well, yeah, I think in this film, what we did, but we tried to be very careful about how much of it we use and be as strategic about as possible. The news media, the traditional news media, becomes our narration, if you will. It becomes our way to communicate to the viewer certain contexts about what's happening, so that we don't have to either narrate it or have someone in the film explain it to the viewer. So we try to use the news media to set up stuff, but we also wanted to just kind of plunge you in, and not and we're very mindful about how much we felt like you needed to know versus to just experience. So, for example, with each of the candidates, we talked about this, like, well, should we should we lay out their platforms and all of that, and give a lot of their personal history? And we decided we could do that, but no, this is not that kind of political film. This is an experiential sort of look at the political process in a much sort of broader and at the same time intimate way. And so we want to plunge the viewer in and let the viewer find their way through this and bring their own, intelligence and observational abilities to the experience of watching this, so that it's an engaged process instead of a spoon-fed one. I find a lot of documentaries, particularly television documentaries, you barely have to pay attention to them to get what they have to say, because they just tell you everything.
Correct.
You can kind of be half there and still get it. By get it, I mean get what they have to say, because they just spoon feed everything to you. They don't demand of you that you need to pay attention and engage with this. And that's something we try and do.
Yeah, you do helpfully give us the little maps of
Yes.
neighborhood we're in, but actually after a while, maybe it's just because I watched it all, in one binge. After a while, I didn't need those.
Yes.
I sort of
You kind of knew where you were. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty. Did you ever? I mean, this was a 5-part miniseries. When you started this process, did you imagine it that it was going to be this big, epic 5-part thing, or did you think this was going to be a feature?
A feature. Yeah, we started out with the idea that it was going to be a feature. Then we got out and we were shooting and shooting and shooting, and there was all these things happening. And it certainly dawned on us while we were shooting, like, oof, we got a lot here. But when we got to editing, I tried to, I had my strong suspicions that it wanted to be longer. But what I did when we got to editing is that me and my editing partner on this, David Simpson, who's this incredibly talented editor, we just started cutting. I identified 100 scenes that we had shot out of about 200, and said, okay, we're going to edit some version of these and then reassess what we think that we want this thing to be. Well, that ended up being 11 hours long. Everything was fat and, rough cut. So, it wasn't finely honed, but still it was 11 hours. So at that point, I kind of went, this is the miniseries. I mean, we could, if we're going to make this into a feature doc, it's going to be a Frederick Wiseman length feature doc. And it's going to mean stripping away a lot of things that I think are compelling and interesting. And, frankly, I think we could have easily made it 6 hours. There was plenty of strong material that didn't find its way into the series because we tried to narrow it down as best as I can. I don't have exactly a reputation for making short work, I think, so, yeah. But, then it was going to be just a 4-part series, and that's what we made. But then when the pandemic hit and we hadn't sold the series yet, I decided that we needed to get out and film. And then when George Floyd hit, it was like, well, now this isn't just even an epilogue about the pandemic. This is a full-on episode. And I'm glad we did that, because I think even though I feel like the first 4 episodes have everything of relevance to say in of themselves about the world we're living in, that 5th episode, just brings it on home in terms of where we are at as a country right now, I think.
Yeah, and I told you before we came on air that the contrast of the first 4 episodes, and then seeing live during COVID, it's just so striking, to see a city so full of life and energy, and then to see the impact. It
was amazing. Yeah. And it was historic. And for a while there, it felt like a ghost town,
How did the filming change? I mean, of course you needed to do safety precautions and everything, but how did the filming
Yep.
shift. Yeah.
Well, at first, during the pandemic phase, when it was before George Floyd hit, and when there were orders to shelter in place here in Chicago, like a lot of places, and early on, I thought, well, this is maybe an epilogue. Maybe this is a 20-minute thing or something, total. This is a mistake I made constantly, thinking I'm making something this big. That's this big. We thought, well, we'll do these interviews via the computer, via Zoom, like me and you were doing now, that this would be the way I would. And I did have this idea, it'd be great to reconnect with people that you've gotten to know in the first 4 episodes and sort of check in with them, that would be a way for this episode to feel like a part of the thing we've been making, is not just to go out and find all new people for the episode, but to reconnect with people you've gotten to know and sort of see how this pandemic has impacted them. And so that's what I started to do. But then once George Floyd hit, it was like, we have to get back in the streets. I mean, we cannot do this without being in the streets. And so at that point, my son, Jackson, who was also doing a lot of work, and Zach Piper, my producing partner, and myself were the primary people. We wore masks, we wore gloves, we tried to maintain distance. We sanitized a lot, the gear and ourselves. And fortunately, we got through a pretty intensive period of shooting out in the streets with a lot of people without catching COVID. So,
wow. Steve, so you had 21 candidates that were going for the mayoral race. How did the process for you to pick which ones to follow?
Yeah, great question. We knew we weren't going to follow 21. That would be utter madness. So part of what governed our thinking was, one was we wanted to have a racially diverse presentation of the candidates, because it was quite a racially diverse field. So we wanted to have a diverse field of candidates that we zeroed in on. Secondly, I did want to try to ingratiate ourselves into the campaigns of a few, or at least one or maybe 2 frontrunner type candidates, the candidates that had a serious shot at winning, according to everyone. That was hard, if not impossible, because the front-running candidates did not want us around. They didn't see any value in having us around because we weren't going to help them get elected, which is true. And in a way, it was okay because we just showed up at their events. We showed up at debates. We still got them. They're in the movie, but they just didn't allow us in the way that, say, Lori Lightfoot eventually did, or Amara Anya did, or Neil Salas Griffin, or Paul Vallis. And that was the third aspect, which was I wanted to pick candidates that I just felt were interesting people. And so we picked people that we thought were interesting, and Lori Lightfoot certainly met that measurement. A Black gay woman who'd never held political office before and had a strong personality. It's like, well, of course I want to follow her. Amara Anya was another one that was quite fascinating. Neil Salas Griffin literally came in, spoiler alert, he comes in last in the election. And yet he is one of the most memorable characters in our series, because it's not about that in our series. It's about who is he and why does he want to be the mayor of Chicago, and who is this man and what is he about?
Yeah, his mother is such a compelling character, and she's in the background, but but you feel her.
Yes.
There are things that your camera captures that speak so much, like Periwinkle's body language and the notes that she has answering things. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of the difference between what we're doing and what the everyday media are doing, right? That event that you're talking about, where she's looking at her notes and can't seem to answer a question without looking at notes that clearly don't even have the answer to those questions on them, but she's nervously looking at it. you know, that's a campaign stop where she got some endorsements. There was a number of the regular media folks there. If you were to watch the news story that night, you would have seen a little bit of a snippet of a speech endorsing her, and they would have said, you know, Tony picked up the endorsements of so-and-so and so-and-so this today up in Logan Square, you know, little soundbite. Whereas we would go to those events with the idea of we're making a scene out of this, we're making a movie. And so those kind of moments where she's struggling and you see that she is not good at this, she is not good at campaigning, are to us are the most revelatory moments. Those are the moments that have to be in what we're doing versus what the everyday press does.
Correct. And then you show us in the debate, you show us all of them at once, and you see the body language and you see the reactions, and which is quite telling. I love the way that Lori Lightfoot is you seem to be discovering her, as so are we, as
Yes.
you know, she starts as a long shot. I was describing before we went on that, you know, when we first see her in your documentary, she's in the background.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, you know, can you tell us about that process, that evolution of almost discovering Lori Lightfoot?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is she was one of the very first candidates that I reached out to try to get her to participate in this. And she wasn't, like you say, she was not a front runner at all. And she was an interesting candidate to people, but not someone that people thought was really going to have much of a chance of becoming mayor. But she was fascinating to me. But even though Lori personally liked what we were doing, we had a hard time at first getting cooperation from her press people to allow us to do some filming with her out on the campaign trail. And I kept hammering it. Thank God, in retrospect, I kept hammering. We'd see her at events that she, you know, we'd show up at events and I'd go up to her and I'd say, Lori, we still want to film with you. And she'd be like, yeah, I know. It turned out that her press people really did not want her to do this. And it became clear to us. But Lori herself personally liked it. And at a certain point, I started to just deal directly with her. She made the mistake of giving me her cell phone. Or we would hear that she's showing up at this to go do some door-to-door knocking, and we would just show up because I knew if I asked the press person, they would never say yes. So we just showed up, and I would go right past the press person to Lori and say, hey, Lori, hi, do you mind if we put a mic on you today and film? And she'd say yes, and then I'd catch the press person giving me the side eye, but Lori said yes. So what are you going to say? And so that was our process with her. But in the construction of the series that you watch, partly because we didn't have that early engagement with her that we wanted, you do kind of discover her in the way she was kind of discovered as a candidate. And it kind of works organically to our, you know, it worked out for us organically that happened. And by the time it got to election day, we had accumulated and made that connection with her, and we were able to get the things that we needed in order to, I think, satisfyingly show her rise to win the mayor.
You also, in one fascinating aspect of the documentary, is this Byzantine process of the elections. Were you familiar with that process?
I didn't know much about it. I mean, I knew that the petition challenge process was part of the political gamesmanship that goes on in Chicago. I had no idea at the degree to which and how Byzantine, which is a great way to describe it, it in fact was, and got totally sucked into that process.
It's fascinating.
We could have made a whole film on that process. We spent a lot of time there, and we joked that if Frederick Wiseman were doing the film on this election, the entire film would be called Board of Elections, and it would take place there. He would ignore the rest of it, and it'd be great. But it would just be that.
You know, when you first started focusing on that, I was going like, this is, what is
Why?
why? But then all of a sudden, I was describing to a friend of mine that it's like Game of Thrones, but it's like in election rooms. It is surreal.
I like that description. We were like Game of Thrones. The only thing we didn't have were battles, sex, and dragons.
Well, but it was
Otherwise, we're exactly the same. We had a lot of characters and a lot of backstabbing.
that access to those election, because I mean, I was noticing that, there are several times scenes that are saying, you cannot be speaking, they don't want the TV reporters in there, but you're actually in there with your camera. How did you get access?
The guy Jim Allen, who is a minor, rather funny character in the series. He's always got these little quips, and
he's outside checking that
he's outside. He's making Willie Wilson, the candidate, leave because he's trying to give hot chocolate away, which is a campaign violation. But Jim Allen liked us. Jim Allen knew some of my past work, which helped. And he said, hey, if you have press passes, which we got, he said, this process is actually open. So it wasn't so much in those rooms that the TV stations couldn't have been there. They just never did it. And we did. Okay. They just never did it. In fact, when they heard about the smackdown between Ricky Hollywood Hendon and Jamal Green, the candidate that we capture, that's a pretty vivid moment in the series.
Yeah.
One of the TV stations the next day saw us and said, "You got that, right?" And I go, "Yeah." They go, "Can we have some of that footage? We just want to use a little bit of it?" And I said, No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
So Steve, you have other stories as well. You have the Lincoln Yards situation, that development happening, and then you're juggling the murder trial of a police officer, and then the indictment of Ed Burke as well.
Action-packed.
I mean, was that fun for you to be juggling all these stories at the same time?
It became fun. I mean, like I say, at first it could feel overwhelming. And one of the things I remember talking to Zach about is going, saying, look, there's no way we can really tell the story of the city. I mean, there's not, we did this very small team. You know what I mean? This was not, I didn't get up in the morning and send 5 camera crews out. It was like me going to shoot, or Jackson going to shoot, my son, or occasionally Kevin going to shoot. It was a very small production, even though it looks like we were everywhere. It looks
like you guys were everywhere, yeah.
Well, and I just remember at one point saying, there's no way we're going to get our arms around this whole city. There's no way. So we're going to have to make peace with the fact that we can only do and tell the story that we encounter. And when we encounter it, we do what we can, and we just have to make our peace with that. And, you could send out 5 other filmmakers during that time period to do a similar approach to telling the story of this city. And they would come back with 5 very different films about what this city means and what it went through. And we just had to make our peace with that. And once we made our peace with that, then it became more fun. Then it became more like, well, of course Ed Burke got indicted. It's like, well, let's go. Let's just go. Let's just see what happens, and that became, that's why I say at a certain point, this sort of serendipitous seat of our pants approach became so attractive to us that it became my favorite kind of filming. Mm-hmm. Even though it was more high wire act in terms of like, well, what are we going to end up with?
But going back to the editing, when you were editing, the creating the narrative, were you aware? I mean, of course you were aware, but how were you mixing in the story of Lincoln Yards? Were you, and then the trial of the policeman, et cetera? Were you conscious that let's keep bringing that up?
Yes, yeah. We try to, first of all, we try to, you know, maintain. I'm not a strict believer that everything has to be chronological at all in a documentary, but there are certain things that want to be chronological and even need to be chronological. And so I'm always aware of that. And so the trial took place over the course of a couple of months. And so I knew we didn't want to just deal with it in one episode and be done with it, that we would want to spread it out between the trial and then the sentencing, which was a month and a half after the trial concluded. So we knew we wanted to spread that out. The same with Lincoln Yards. It's like it was this evolving thing and an evolving issue in the race. And so we wanted to spread it out. And so, it's a bit like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Although it's a bit like creating a jigsaw puzzle, probably more than putting one together. It's like you're trying to figure out how you can construct, especially once you're making episodes, is where do you want this particular thread of that story to leave off for this episode that leaves you in a place to be really curious about what happens next, but we're not going to give it all to you now. I'll give you a perfect example. The end of episode 1 is Mace Jackson's radio show, where he plays
the shooting,
the 16 shots that the police officer killed this young black man with, and he does it for this very dramatic effect, and it's quite powerful and quite potent. And we thought that's a perfect end to an episode, because it's very powerful, it's very potent, and it also hopefully makes you as a viewer want to keep watching to see what happens in that trial.
Mm-hmm. What was the most surprising thing that happened while you were filming?
Oh, I think the Board of Election stuff was probably the most surprising, because I just had no concept really about how ridiculous it was. So that was probably the most surprising. It wasn't surprising that Ed Burke got indicted, because I don't think anybody who follows politics in Chicago was surprised that that would happen. It was a little surprising that he won so easily, despite it. He just walked to victory. No big deal. And certainly Lori Lightfoot winning was hugely surprising. I mean, you see this in the series, but a month before Election Day, she's at 2.8% in the polls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she ended up winning that initial election, which got her to the runoff with Tony Preckwinkle, and then she crushed Tony Preckwinkle in the runoff. And that was certainly surprising. That was surprising to everybody in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And well, I mean, you've gotten rave reviews deservedly on this work. What has been the reaction in Chicago itself from the people? Well, I mean, you're in lockdown, but
Yeah.
but what has
We've
been?
There's certain Lori Lightfoot texted me when she had watched, I think, maybe the first couple of episodes, and it was very complimentary. And she said, when I'm done, maybe we should get together for a beer. And I was like, sure, that'd be great. I have this feeling that by the time she got through episode 5, where she's, got a lot of detractors in episode 5, as the now sitting mayor of Chicago, that maybe I won't get the beer. I don't know. I mean, I think we're completely fair to her, totally fair to her. Certain of the candidates have loved it. Neil Salas Griffin loves it. Amara loves it. Jamal Green, we've heard good things from him. There are other candidates we haven't heard a peep out of, because I guess they just didn't like it, or they didn't. But across the board, the people, not just candidates, but the people, the Uber driver, the guys in the barbershops, the response has been very positive. They're very happy that they were a part of it. And then the response in terms of just the local people, the Chicagoans watching it, both critics as well as just people who care about the city, I think has been overwhelmingly positive. People, it's funny how, people will watch it, and people who like Lori Lightfoot will feel like the film shows what it was they liked about Lori Lightfoot. And the people who really don't like Lori Lightfoot will watch it and think it shows what they don't like about Lori Lightfoot, which is really interesting. And to me, I consider that a success. It doesn't mean that the film doesn't have a point of view, but it means that it is, our hope was to make it a rich, nuanced, and complicated portrait of this city. I mean, I've seen stuff where people say, this is why Chicago's so screwed up. And I've seen people say, this is what I love about this city. This is what I love about this city. So,
And also in its microcosm, I mean, it's in its specificity of a Midwest city, we get a picture of America at large as well. And that's actually, I keep telling my friends that that's the beauty of it, is that it's very microscopic about one city, but it is talking about all of us. I mean, all the ethnic groups, all the politics, all the intrigue, you have it all in that documentary.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, because that was absolutely one of our hopes, is that you would see this as a portrait of a very unique place that's kind of amazing in so many ways, infuriating and inspiring. And at the same time, you would see it as a portrait of America, at least particularly urban America.
Yeah. Well, Steve, what a joy to talk to you. And
yeah, it was fun.
And congratulations. What an incredible achievement. I mean, I mentioned before we came online that, you're one of the best documentary filmmakers. Hoop Dreams is a classic, but now we have your crowning achievement here with City So Real. It's
well,
terrific.
Thank you. Thank you for your passion and for your questions. It was great to talk.
Absolutely.
And for showing it at your wonderful film festival.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, stay well, and we'll see you soon.
Yep, you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.